Hi YouTube. Today I want to talk a little bit about, or I'd like to compare and contrast some Western occult concepts with those of the East. And I'm doing this because I've been an astrologer for 19 years. And I studied Vedic Astrology first. That was my first love. And that's what I practiced mainly, is Vedic Astrology with the tropical zodiac. And about 5 years ago, I stopped giving consultations because I just got bored with it, and I wanted to learn Western occultism, and I just dove into that and started learning about. I studied the Golden Dawn for a little while, and I studied Celtic shamanism, or more of the Irish way of magical practices and their occult traditions, and which I liked immensely. I really enjoy it, and I'm still learning right now. And what I wanted to talk about now, or today, in this video, is how similar they are. What I find with the Western tradition in occultism is it's much more symbolic and cryptic in its explanation of the methodology, and I don't know. I think it's because there's two reasons why I think it's like this. One is the laymen, or so-called commoners, during after Christianity had been imposed upon Europe, they were expressing the exoteric doctrine of Christianity, which was had nothing about astrology in it, or not any in any way that was discernible to the average person, and these astrological knowledge was lost or destroyed, and people were prosecuted for these things. I gave an example in another video I did of Giordano Bruno, who was an astrologer, among other things, an occultist, and he was burned at the stake. So, and they any kind of natural magic, as they call it, was prosecuted, and more so, in the 1500s, that's when the witch craze started. But even before that, this knowledge was lost, and especially at the end of the classical period of the Greek, in Egypt, when they burned the library at Alexandria, a lot of this occult knowledge was lost, and what continued on had to be put in a code. And that's one reason that I think that it's so cryptic and codified. And another reason I believe is they wanted to keep it exclusive and not let it out to everyone, which is what they do in the East as well. And there is a book from India that is in coded Sanskrit, an astrological text from the BC times that is written in coded Sanskrit, and was just it has been interpreted by a couple of people, and so they did that as well in the East, but they didn't do it because they were being prosecuted for their knowledge. They did it because they wanted to keep it exclusive, which is also understandable. So anyway, having said that, so I started studying Western esotericism about 5 years ago. Plus, I did other things. I was writing fictional or fantasy fiction, but now I've really dove into it, and I decided to start from the very beginning, or reading as much as I can from the Middle Ages and also the Renaissance. And the first book I picked up in this endeavor is by Henry Cornelius Agrippa. It is the 3 books of occult philosophy, and I finished the first book, which is about natural magic, And the reason I wanted to talk about that is because I noticed so many similarities between what he's talking about in that first natural magic chapter, or that first book, and what I had learned in Vedic astrology. And he talks about astrology and what the planets rule in this first book. And he also talks about natural magic, so-called natural magic, where you like attracts like, and some things are inimical to other things. If you want to get rid of something, there's certain substances that you wear, or that you even eat, or you make a brew out of it. And a lot of these things, he talks about animals, using certain animals and herbs, and you can't, at least I haven't found, you can't get things like, he was talking about attracting romance or love, or getting pregnant, and you would take the venereal parts of a sparrow or a pigeon and make a brew with that, or dry them out and wear them around your neck, which is really impossible now. I mean, back then we could catch animals and cut them up like that. I suppose you could do that now too, but that you can't go into a shop and buy these things like cat brains. You maybe some places in New Orleans you could do that, but and I couldn't find anything online. But you might be able to find them on an Onion site, which I didn't even look. I didn't even bother with looking, because I don't really, that type of magic doesn't really interest me. But it was, what I enjoyed reading about it was his references to astrology. And astrology is so important in magic, because what planets rule what, and the planets actually, in the Vedas, the planets are embodiments of the elements. And they're actually they were talking about the elements way before they started talking about the planets. The Vedas mention propitiations to the elements, which later morphed into gods, which later morphed into the planets and their influence over the earth and life on earth and everything they ruled. So anyway, that was the first book of Occult Philosophy by Henry Cornelius Agrippa. And the next books that I'm going to read have to do with, what is it? Different types, or it was celestial magic, which will be interesting because I think that's going to use astrology a lot more. And celestial magic is book 2, and book 3 is ceremonial magic, which I have experience with. I did some videos about that. But anyway, I'm going to dive into that. But I want to show this book. This is called Brihat Parashara Hora Shastra, and it's by Maharishi Parashara, which was he's a sage that lived about, they don't really know exactly, but they want to say 600, 700 BC, and it was written by him, and there's 2 volumes. This is the first volume, and it's well worn. It's been through so many different moves. So this actually tells also what all the planets rule, and what the signs rule, and what kind of signs rule what. And this was 600 BC. This was written, even before, or when Greece started to, it was called the pre-Socratics. They started to voice their philosophy, which kind of broke away from this mystical tradition, this supernatural tradition that the Greeks had before, which was more poetic, like Virgil and the great Greek poetic sagas, or epic sagas. And so they were becoming more logical and kind of breaking with tradition, as Rene Guénon would say. But that's where he put that when he put that date of, we kind of started, Western civilization started to split off from its tradition, which was kind of obscured back then and much more, I don't know, grandiose and fantasial. But anyway, so in India, they had a pantheon of gods, and they were polytheistic, and that lasted. It's lasted until the present day. They broke off on Buddhism, but that's something that I don't want to talk about in this, but in this video. But so he also talks about Henry Cornelius Agrippa in his first book of Natural Magic. He talks about prana or chi or vril, and he doesn't really give it a name. He just he either calls it spirit or the ether. But it is a substance that you can bring into your body and work through your body, like kind of like Reiki, through your fingertips or through your eyes. He talks about that a lot. And what I noticed about this, his language that he uses and the language that is used in the Tao or some older Chinese texts, when they talk about moving chi through your body, it's just a lot more cryptic, and it's not as explained as well as it should be. And that's what I enjoy about reading the Eastern explanations of these things, because they go much more in depth and give you clearer instructions about how to use this substance called chi, or the Indians call it prana, and they call it vril in the Western tradition, but that's mostly in Germany, and that's kind of very few and far between it's mentioned. And it just kind of resurrected in the early 1900s. So, and then, you don't really have that mention in the shamanic traditions like they have that they had in Britain and Ireland. So, and then, some people say, oh, well, chi doesn't even exist. A lot of these martial arts practitioners, and I think even Bruce Lee once said, oh, chi doesn't exist. And that's just not true. There are several masters, I guess they're called that, talk about using the chi just to strengthen the body and using it with their will to have an effect on other people's bodies, but also to develop incredible strength and strengthen the bones and stimulate the endocrine system or the glands. And if you work with prana at all, or if you can move it through your body, or even if you're imagining moving it through your body, it's something that you have to develop and you have to keep working at, and something that you do every day or every other day. And it's just like anything else, practice makes perfect, and then you will begin to feel it. Now, and this is connected to astrology, because certain people can move it better through certain areas of the body, and they can use it to heal some of the afflictions in their charts. So having said that, I really do see similarities between the Western occult tradition and the Eastern occult tradition, but the Eastern occult tradition uses astrology a lot more, and it's much more it's more in depth and complicated, because they've studied it for centuries, where we had kind of a break, or we had a huge break actually, for hundreds of years, and where a lot of people were persecuted for that. So I actually am going to be making videos. I'm going to try for every day, but I go through waves. Like sometimes I just really want to make videos and I feel so inspired, and then other times I just don't want to do it at all. And but I'm going to try to do a video every day about relating some of these Eastern teachings to the Western teachings, and also using, you know, back in the around the turn of the century, not this century, but you know, in the beginning of in the 1900s, there was this incredible renaissance and interest in the Western world for an occult tradition, and you had a lot of books. You had Blavatsky and Gurdjieff, and all of these people came and tried to make sense of what they had learned from the East and what was left over in the Western tradition outside of Christianity. So I'm going to do a video on that and kind of try to explain some of how astrology relates to what they were saying, and how the two traditions really aren't that different. So, you know, and I'm talking about Chinese tradition, but also Indian Vedic culture, and a little bit from Persia, or actually it's from Tajikistan, but I'm going to use those. So yeah, that's what I'm going to do. And eventually I'm going to start giving readings again because I miss it. I do miss it. So that's all for today. Thank you. Thank you.